Let's talk about tariffs. So last night I did a live and there was a guy that kept coming in and he kept yelling about tariffs, and I realized that it's hard to have that argument when you're trying to respond to hundreds of people in the chat, and of course this guy decided he wanted to drive the conversation. But additionally, I wanted to make my position clear on it and talk a little bit about tariffs and how the economy will work with tariffs and just what that's going to look like, and hopefully assuage some fears about tariffs. Now, the first thing about tariffs, essentially, I'm just going to explain really quickly at a basic level. Tariff just means when you're importing a good from a specific country, and it can vary from which type of good it is, then there's an extra fee charged by the country where the good is being imported to the country bringing it in. It's kind of an access fee for the market that is the United States. So this is an important point, and I think it's one that gets glossed over a lot that people don't realize. Other countries are and will be very excited to have access to the 330 million people with the most buying power in the world to market and sell their products. That alone is enough because of the amount of people in the country and the amount of buying power that is here. They will be willing to eat some of that cost from a tariff. Now, what that cost is, I don't know. But it will offset some of the cost already just by the fact that we are who we are. So there's that. Now, let's move on from there to the more complicated parts of tariffs. Now, historically, there have been quite a few tariffs that the U.S. has implemented. A lot of those tariffs were dissolved under Bush and Obama. Of course, the TPP was a wonderful piece of legislation that made it much easier to import things for other countries, and it allowed them to maximize profits. But that is not exactly the topic here, so we'll leave that alone. In the 80s and 90s, about 80% of goods that Americans bought and sold were made in the U.S. Through the 90s, early 2000s, and so on, it's gotten to the point that right now about 11% of the things that you buy and sell are manufactured in the U.S. These are the hard numbers. So let's think back to the 80s and the 90s and the economies back then. They were generally in better shape than we are right now. But more importantly, buying and selling American-made products did not break the consumers. Well, let's use that as kind of a jumping off point here. About 80% of Americans, according to the Wall Street Journal back in 2017, so it's a little bit of an older article, but it was the most recent one I could find that delved into this topic. About 80% of Americans are willing to spend 10 to 20% extra on American-made products. And this could be a question of quality or longevity of the product itself, or it could just be out of a willingness to support fellow Americans. Now, this also, manufacturing things in America obviously brings American jobs, and it causes a boom in the economy if we can bring back more and more manufacturing companies. So when we start thinking about tariffs and say, okay, things are going to get more expensive if we import them. Well, what Trump has proposed is two different kinds of tariffs. One is a low tariff that's simply just a money-making tool. So most other countries have tariffs on us, by the way. We don't have tariffs on a lot of countries, or at least not significant ones. So Trump has proposed two kinds of tariffs. One would be just a low tariff, like maybe 10%, that would be a money-making endeavor. Now, if that 10% hike is too steep for Americans, let's say that 100% of that is eaten by the American consumers. If 10% is too high, what will happen is Americans will stop buying that product, which will drive the demand down, which in turn will push the price lower and lower. Because the thing to remember is many of these manufacturing companies that are making products overseas, like Nike, for example, they're using slave labor to make these products, and so they have some wiggle room. So they will eat some of that cost if it means having access to the American market and making sure that Americans continue to buy these products. Now, that kind of leads into a different topic here. The Democrats, the party of humanitarian endeavors, are so willing to continue to exploit child slavery that they're going to scream about these tariffs and say, well, Americans have to make these things this much more expensive. Well, that's true. When we manufacture things in the U.S., it is more expensive. Part of that is because the people that make these things are earning a living wage. They're getting health insurance. They're not working for 5 cents a day. They're not working 16-hour shifts at 12 years old. That's why these aren't sweatshops in the U.S. But that brings up the next piece of this this plan, and that is that you can't view so tariffs on their own. If we took everything as it is right now and we added tariffs, then you would see an across-the-board hike in the prices of all of these things, and the toll that it would take on people's pocketbooks would be significant. But you have to take the economic policies as a package instead of just one lone piece of it. Because when you couple the tariffs with the drill baby drill idea from Trump, where energy independence, decreasing energy prices, and the slowing down of inflation that will come with the energy prices, and with a better control of the markets, which we're already seeing the stock market doing significantly better, by the way. If we take an average inflation rate from Trump's previous presidency, which I don't think is an unfair way to look at things, because that is the sample size that we have, and you couple that with the decrease in energy costs, which will affect every step of the supply chain, I think you will net more. And I'm not alone in this. There's a lot of economists that agree with this. The net will be better. We will be economically far better off if we look at these policies as a whole. Now, Trump has proposed, and I lost myself on this earlier, but I want to go back to it. Trump has proposed the two types of tariffs. So one is just the money-making type of tariff, just a low tariff across the board. The other type is an incredibly steep tariff that would be levied against certain countries, and only in certain industries, which would force, like maybe automaking, for example. Instead of importing all of our parts and then assembling it in the U.S., we would manufacture everything and put it together in the U.S. again, which would be a big boom for the Rust Belt. They would levy about a 200% tariff, was the example that Trump gave. In that case, that would almost immediately force a quick turnaround by these large corporations to bring their manufacturing and their business back to the U.S. instead of continuing to manufacture elsewhere and then import it, because that would be cheaper. So now that 200% tariff forces them to begin their manufacturing in the U.S. again. So there, a lot of this, and I'm not going to pretend that I know everything about the tariffs, but I wanted to kind of lay it out in a way that was easy for me to understand, me as someone with, a background in healthcare, not in economics. But I wanted to lay that out because I don't think I did a good job of being clear about my position on tariffs and why I think that the tariffs won't be the worst thing in the world for us. And one final point, people keep calling it a tax on the consumers, and that is just not accurate. The things that we're importing, so it's only a quote-unquote tax on the consumers that are buying those specific things, and if those things can't be found American-made or from a country that's not having these tariffs levied against them. So it only becomes a tax on the consumer if it's something that you are deciding you're going to buy, which in some cases you don't have a whole lot of options. For example, parts of your car are imported, so those prices may go up. But